North Africa in the year 1879. There are three main power blocks. There are the Boers in the west, the Zulus in the east, and the British in the south. In the east we have the Zulu Empire, built by conquering tribes as the tribe came down Africa and ended up in what they considered to be heaven, which was Natal. It was heaven because it had no tsetse fly. They were a cattle-based economy, and the tsetse fly was quite a crucial part of their lives. In the west we have the Boers, who came from the Cape, and when the Boers first came to the Cape, there were a few Hottentot bushmen there, nobody else. We pushed them away from the Cape. They went over the Orange River, which became the Orange Free State. Then they moved north over the Vaal River, VAAL, and that became the Transvaal. So we have these three power blocks competing with one another. The Zulus had an army of around 40,000 men. We had in the British Army between 5,000 and 10,000 at the most. So the governor, Battle Frere, engineered a battle with the Zulus. Some of the Zulu women had committed adultery with other men before they were married. They fled over into the British territory. We used it as an excuse to invade. The fact that there were 40,000 soldiers on the border was, even though he hadn't said he would invade, it was considered a threat. In the end, Prince Dlamini, who was one of the Zulu princes, actually invaded the British territory just after we'd invaded their territory. And he fought us at the Battle of Rorke's Drift. We are members of the 1879 Anglo-Zulu War group. We're affiliated to the Royal Welsh Regiment, and our base for the last 22 years has been the Regimental Museum at Brecon on the Watling. Fabulous museum if you have a chance to visit it. So the men you see before you are members of the 24 Foot. These are the soldiers that fought at Rorke's Drift. The 24 Foot was actually an English regiment. It was the 2nd Warwickshires. However, before the Zulu War, they had spent 4 years at the Brecon barracks. So they marched out of Brecon to go to their deaths or whatever in Zululand 4 years after having been there. When they got to the Cape, they had to march 600 miles in the hot African sun. The Boers called them the Ruinecks because they had red necks. So the British soldier wasn't like the Zulu, he was heavily encumbered, and this is a small example of the amount of kit they had to carry. They were pushing and helping ox carts being pulled by 6 to 8 oxen. Average speed was 2 or 3 miles an hour. In January in Zululand, which is KwaZulu-Natal now, it was the rainy season. So everything was a complete mud and quagmire. So these guys were having to push these ox carts with all the gear on, the tents and everything, through all the mud. There were some roads, but they weren't what we would call roads at all today. So the gentlemen before you are wearing 2 types of kit. First of all, we have what we call the full valise from 1871. Shoulder straps, 2 pouches, a bread bag here for personal belongings and bits of food. On the side here is a bayonet, which you'll see in a minute. Round here we have the expanse pouch. So the bullets in here, there's 20 bullets in each pouch. They are in packets tied with string. The expanse has the loose bullets inside, so the firer can take them out at will and put them in the rifle. Looking at the rifle, can you just put it forward? This is a Martini Henry. This was the first custom-built breech-loading rifle. Before that, everything went down the muzzle to be loaded. It was all muzzle loading. This was the first custom-built as a breech-loading rifle. To bridge the gap between the muzzle loader of the Enfield, the British Army, as usual, tried to do it on the cheap, so they took the Enfield rifles and added what we call a Snyder conversion down here to make it a breech loader. But it wasn't built as a breech loader. This was. So this rifle here is a man-stopper. It fires what you would call from the First World War a dum-dum bullet. It's a soft lead bullet. So in the museum at Brecon we have a glass case on the wall in the Zulu room. Inside it is a plain tunic like mine, an officer called Godwin Austin, captain. He was the captain of B Company and should have been at Rorke's Drift. On the front of the tunic is a small hole, at the back of the tunic there's a hole the size of my hand there. He was lucky to be alive. They sent him back to Britain to convalesce. As there was no leader, the second in command, Gonville Bromhead, who was deaf, by the way, took charge of the company. One of the reasons B Company were at Rorke's Drift was because Bromhead was deaf, which meant that he was no good in the line fighting, so they put him on the line of communications. They thought, he's not going to get into trouble, there's going to be no battle, he'll be there, he'll be fine. So he got the post by default and ended up with the Victoria Cross, such is life and the fortunes of war. So the tunic I'm wearing, officers often wore private uniforms. Bromhead, played by Michael Caine in the film Zulu, he didn't wear a fancy uniform. They've got gold braid on their shoulders. They didn't wear that in action. Those were dress uniforms for ceremonial occasions. So they took the facings off. Godwin Austin's tunic is exactly the same as this. It's got the collar markings on here, and you'll notice there's a sphinx there from Egypt. That's because in Napoleonic times, the 24th fought in Egypt. So like the Lincolnshires and some of the other regiments, Gloucestershire's, they have the sphinx on their collar. So this is the full valise set. It would have a blanket roll and it would have a brown bag on the back for extra things. This is more of a fighting order where you just have the pouches but you don't have the cross straps. So some men will be dressed like that, others will be dressed like this. Most of them didn't wear the badge on the helmet. Now if you look at the uniform, from a target, most of the men who were killed at Rorke's Drift were killed by the Zulu marksman on the Oscarberg above the actual place. And the irony is, it wasn't so much the guys who were facing the Oscarberg, because they were protected by the mealie bag wall, it was the guys who were facing away on the other wall, where the musket bullets were coming over and hitting them on the other wall. So the white helmet is supposed to protect you from the sun. It does, to a certain degree, cover the back of the neck and the face, but it's not exactly brilliant. The hat I'm wearing is an officer's patrol hat. This, without gold braid, is anything up to the rank of captain. Above captain, you have a single line of gold braid across the brim here. On the hat, you can see the numerals 24 and the Sphinx as well. So that shows the regiment, the 2nd Warwickshires, who were actually in the action. So again, we just have the 2 pouches and the expanse pouch. So first of all, we'll do a little bit of drill for you. Some of the things that happened in Zulu didn't happen. They didn't sing Men of Harlech. I'm sorry to disappoint you. You know, they were too busy trying to keep alive because they started about 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and the Zulus didn't stop charging until about 3 o'clock of the following morning. One of the reasons for that, which people don't tell you about, is the fact that they were on drugs. They had in their ears, they had in the lobe, they had a tube. Inside that tube was the witch doctor's potion, which consisted of marijuana, magic mushrooms and various other narcotics.
Oh, they were happy.
For example, at the Battle of Isandlwana earlier in the day, where half the central column got massacred, some of the Zulus who were attacking had got 3 or 4 of those bullets inside of them, and they were still fighting. So it enhanced their aggressive qualities. It was a wonderful thing from their point of view. From our point of view, it wasn't at all. Our guys were getting a tot of rum at that, if that. So let's have a look at the actual drill. So, section will fix bayonets. In fact, I'll tell you what we'll do something else. Let's do shoulder arms. Shoulder arms! Now, if you have a general, when we had the Queen here earlier in the year, Queen Victoria, we did a presentation, we did a salute to her. And I've got my sword here, so I'll just do it. So this is a genuine, getting off the point, this is a genuine 1822 pattern officer's sword. It has a runnel in the groove here to let the blood out when you've punched it into somebody. This came in 1847. The folding flap on the back here came in 1854. So the sword is between 1847 and 1854. But this is exactly the type of sword that the officers in the Zulu War would have worn. If you look at the hand grip there, you can see it's seen action. Somebody's had a go at this with a chop of some sort. You know, snakeskin handle. This is the undress officer's sword knot on the side. So, we'll be fine for it. So, general salute, present, arms! Shoulder, arms! Order, arms! Section will fix bayonets. Fix! Bayonets! So this is the lunger. You can see it's a triangular pattern. Each side of the triangle has a ferruling side to allow you to pull it out again so it doesn't stick in the wound. Like the runnels on the sword, it's the same principle. Shoulder, arms. So bayonet exercises can vary. We'll do a little bit of bayonet now. So, yeah, well you find there, they're not going to stab them. I hope. Well, you just have to move back, won't you? So we're on shoulder arms. So, port, arms. Right, would you like to move just a tad that way? Just here. I don't want you to stick each other. So it's charge. Charge! Arms! On guard! Point! Ha! So they point, go back to the guard. High guard! Point! Ha! That's if you've got cavalry. Low guard! Point! Ha! That's if you're on the top of a wall, pointing down at an enemy. I'll just have to move out of the way. Right. Right! Parry! Point! Ha! Left! Parry! Point! Ha! Shoulder! Arms! Order! Arms! So the order arms is basically the attention that we hear people talking about now. Section will unfix bayonets! Unfix! Bayonets! So it goes between the legs for added stability, and they take it out and put it back into the scabbard. So, some of you have seen the film Zulu. Has anybody seen the film Zulu Dawn at all?
I have.
There's a horrible moment in there where the column was divided, half of it went running off trying to find the Zulus, another column came up with a guy called Durford. He sent his cavalry out, which were native white farmers and black men as well, the Natal native contingent. They went out in front of the camp trying to find the Zulus. We got to a lip of an escarpment and suddenly they looked down and there was 25 Zulus, 25,000 Zulus sitting on their shields at the bottom of a valley. So what did they do? They didn't turn around and report back to the officer. They started pot-shotting at them. And of course that stirred the hornet's nest up. The Zulus weren't going to attack on that day. That day was the day of the dead moon, which meant there was a solar eclipse in the middle of the battle. So all this gunfire's going on, all these people are dying, and suddenly the light goes out of the sky. It must have been quite an apocalyptic experience for everybody. You know, so there they are in that film Zulu Dawn. They come to the lip, see it, start firing, and suddenly the Zulus rise up and they start running at the guys. So horseback, they turn round and start retreating. Firing, retreating, firing, retreating. They get back to the camp in a big fuzz. Now the problem was, Lord Chancellor took half the men away. Before he took them away, he laid out plans for the camp's defence. The problem was, half the men weren't actually there in the camp. The guy Pillane, who was in charge, left in charge, he'd never seen action. He was a good administrative officer, but he hadn't done any fighting. So he tried to put half the men in all the places where the other men were as well. And they were overextended. Had they lagered the wagons and brought the artillery in on the corners, the battle might have been different. We saw at Rorke's Drift. This battle, Rorke's Drift, was used as a textbook example for lots of armies, the German army, the American army, of a contracting defence actually getting stronger as it contracts. Because the men suddenly become shoulder to shoulder, the defence is far stronger. So you saw the bayonets. You imagine a 4-foot mealy bag wall. This wall was the lifesaver. It stopped the Zulu rush. At Anglo-Zulu, the Zulus are in the camp before they knew where they were, and they hadn't struck the tents. Had they struck the tents, the naval officer who was with Chelmsford with a big telescope would have seen that the camp had been struck. But they looked at the camp and they saw the tents and thought, whoa, everything's fine. So they rushed at the wall. The men behind the wall shot at them. The range of a rifle is plus 1,000 yards. So as they got to the mealy bag wall, they had to put one hand on the wall while holding a spear and a shield. And then they were trying to jump over the wall, and they were getting, excuse me for being graphic, they were getting bayoneted in the throat, the upper chest and the face. As every Zulu fell, he became part of the barricade, which meant the men who were coming behind had to get over their bodies. So it gradually built up in front of them. You know, this story of one Zulu who was nearly 7 foot tall, and his feet were on the barricade, and he was down on the floor with his head. So the bayonet saved the day. He could fire so much, but it was the bayonet. The problem with it was, the Zulus on the right horn of the army had only got stabbing spears, assegais, and a shield. They had no throwing spears. The central part of the left horn and the centre of the buffalo formation, they had throwing spears. But the guys on the right, for some reason, hadn't got them. So when they got to the mealy bag wall, they couldn't throw them at the soldiers behind the wall. And that was their downfall. They just couldn't get over the wall. So then they tried the hospital. They moved round the back. There's a bit of a ledge round the back. But they moved in, they realised the weakest point was the hospital. Now in the film Zulu, it looks like everybody comes together and fights their way out by digging holes in the wall. One guy did have a pickaxe, and that did help to get the hole in the wall. But there's about 3 or 4, what we've seen now, evacuations of the hospital. So for example, Henry Hook, who was the camp cook, was portrayed as a villain in the film, and of course his family walked out from the West End showing of Zulu in absolute disgust at the way that their forebear had been treated. So he was the cook, he was the epitome of a British soldier. He was hard-working, he was well-mannered, he was disciplined. It's the story of him going out to collect the assegais and all the stuff outside the camp, and one of the Zulus came to life and tried to stab him, grabbed hold of his rifle, in the end he had to shoot him. So he helped to get the people out of the hospital. He was a teetotaler for a start, so he didn't break the cabinet open and he didn't start swinging the booze inside. That was just a bit of artistic license. There's lots of it in the film, but it was a miracle that the film was made in apartheid South Africa. So in the film, you have Ketshwayo, the Zulu king. He was played by Prince Buthelezi. Buthelezi, for over 20 years, was our group patron. Unfortunately, he died earlier this year. So what we've done, we've replaced him with Glyn Baker, the son of Sir Stanley Baker from the film. No, he plays Chard, the engineer officer, if you remember that. So we have the connection with that. So they evacuated the hospital. Several were killed. One guy dressed up in women's clothes, that were black, and ran out, dived on the floor, and was trampled by several Zulus who thought he was dead. He lived to tell the tale, but he nearly got shot by the British when he tried to come back into the line in the following morning. So the guys came out of the hospital, those that survived, ran across to where they'd formed, and this was Chard's idea, to form a line of biscuit barrels across the middle of the defence, so that decreased the territory by half. So they were only defending half of what they were defending beforehand. They got to the biscuit barrels, they got in there, they realised that they got a load of surplus mealie bags. They decided to, because they didn't know whether they were going to live or die. You know, this fighting was going on for hours. The Zulus would charge the wall, they'd get shot, they'd retreat, they'd take more of their magic potion, get themselves fired up again, and they'd charge again. The guys were getting broken collarbones because the recoil on the rifle after about 10 shots is quite horrendous. And you'll notice, you'll notice there's a cowhide shield here because the barrel gets very warm as well. It gets so you can't hold it if you're not careful. So that's what that's for. So they came back behind the mealie bags. They saw that there's this pile of mealie bags. What could we do? They built a final redoubt to all die together in the smallest possible space. They put a line of riflemen in and the wounded inside. The line of riflemen meant they had 2 tiers of defence. They got firing over the heads of the men who were at the barricade. So they got double that. There isn't such a thing as volley fire when they're coming at the wall, like you see in the film. You know, it's not glamorised like that, it was just chaos all the time. So the Zulus in the end realised, the chiefs who were at the top, realised that Chelmsford's men were coming back the following morning, the other half of the column that hadn't been involved. They could see them, so they decided they were going to clear out. So they stopped firing. Nobody stopped and sang to each other at the end. Nobody sang praises. The 2 columns passed within 200 yards of each other. They were too tired to even fight each other. Apart from one Zulu, who ran like a madman at the British and promptly got shot. But that was it. They came up to the mission station. They weren't even sure because they saw the hospital was on fire. That was another thing, I'll come to that in a minute. So, on the other side at Helmachar, 2 companies were supposed to be coming down the Nostra Pass to help with to be stationed at Rorke's Drift. They saw the hospital on fire, they thought the Zulus had taken the place, they turned round and went back up the hill again. So that was that side of it. The following morning, Chelmsford sent some of their mounted infantrymen to Rorke's Drift, and they saw, lo and behold, it was still held by the British. Because what had happened earlier at Anglo-Zulu, one of the officers had been told to go back, because he fell off his horse earlier in the day, by Chelmsford to go back to the camp. So he rode back to the camp and suddenly found all the redcoats were all black men. All the black men were wearing red coats, and he suddenly realised he was in the middle of a Zulu army. He turned the horse round and galloped off as fast as he could back to Chelmsford. And it was only when he arrived at Chelmsford did Chelmsford believe that the actual camp had fallen. He'd had reports all day long, which he refused to believe. You know, in our arrogance and all the rest of it. So when that officer got back, they suddenly realised it had all hit the fan. You know? So the NNC rode up to to Rorke's Drift and suddenly realised it hadn't been taken. Some of the guys were still alive. So there was a huge relief. Then they had to start mopping up everything, burning the dead bodies, like the cow disease we had. Anybody who drove down in Devon and Cornwall during the cow situation, you know, was horrendous. So they had to clear everything up. And as I said, in the process of that, Hook nearly got killed by one of them who was lying doggo. So this, as I say, this is a 24-foot regiment, and that was a little bit of a chat. I don't even know what the time is now. Excuse me a second while I just look at the watch.
3 o'clock.
It's nearly 3, that's got to be good for me. Right, so that was a little insight into the conflict that occurred between the Boers. One of the unexpected consequences was that when the Boers saw what the Zulu had done at Isandlwana, they realised the British Empire wasn't infallible. The next year, they started the First Boer War. So we had 3 battles with the Boers, which the British Army lost all of them. We lost several hundred men, none of them got medals. Disgrace, we lost. That situation festered on for 20 years, and we had to have the big Boer War at the turn of the century, 1899, and we had to drag in 450,000 colonial troops from Australia, New Zealand, Canada and South Africa to fight 45,000 Boers. But we weren't wearing red tunics then. The officers weren't wearing swords, they weren't wearing pistols. Weren't wearing pistols. They were wearing private's tunics, maybe a small insignia, and carrying a rifle. Because the Boer children had been taught to fire on horseback from about the age of 10, they were incredible marksmen. In the First Boer War, it's common knowledge that our officers were wearing red and waving a sword, shouting, "Etonia Floriet," or whatever, "Flourish Eton," and all this sort of crap. And they were getting 4 or 5 bullets in their head. As you can see, this is a damn good target, you know? So we had to stop wearing red. Red was the cheapest dye we could buy. It covered up the blood, but it was the cheapest, all right? You know, I know it looks good and it's, you know, frightening the enemy and all that stuff, but it's a fantastic target. The cross belt, you know, why don't we just put a roundly in a circle, a dartboard? Come on guys, sit there. You know, you can see them from miles away. Well, in the days of rifle fire and stuff, the Boers had German rifles. They had Mausers and stuff like that, you know. So they were well equipped. So we had all this conflict in Africa, and we've left it in whatever state it's in now, which isn't too good by the look of it, you know. So that was a little look at the Zulu War. I hope you found that interesting. I've got to stop because my tonsils are going. I wish I brought the microphone with me actually. So there we are, the 24-foot 1879 group based at Brecon at the Regimental Museum. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.